Hello, all. Welcome to Decimal Point Analytics Unplugged. Our goal here is to provide our listeners with the latest trends and expertise in various fields, including data analytics, AI, finance, and ESG. I am your host, Supriya Praveen. In today's episode, we are excited to have Ajay Jindal, the lead solutions architect for DPA's ESG practice. Ajay holds over 2 decades of experience in research and analytics. He brings his extensive cross sectorial exposure for DPA's ESG practice. He is also a certified ESG professional from the CFA Institute. In today's discussion, we will explore the key highlights from DPA's recently published paper, USA ESG Review 2023. This paper examines the latest status and activities among key stakeholders, including corporates, asset managers, regulators, and industry forums. Welcome, Ajay. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Supriya. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the current ESG landscape in the USA.
Fantastic. Let's jump right into it. Ajay, can we start with the key highlights from the recently published paper by DPA's ESG team, the USA ESG Review 2023? Specifically, how are American companies progressing in terms of their climate goals?
Yeah, so as you're aware, within ESG, we tend to focus more on the E part of it, specifically climate change, as we believe this is the most pressing issue of today. So based on our research, it appears that the corporate sector in America is lagging behind on its net zero commitments. So one metric we use to assess net zero efforts is to see how many companies are working with Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI. SBTI works with companies, guiding them on setting net zero targets and offers validation services. And it's become a de facto global standard for these services. Companies from all over the world go to SBTI. As of October 23, 760 US companies are working with SBTI for target validation. This number is low compared to size of USA's corporate sector. For example, this number is 25% less than the number of companies from UK working with SBTI. So at this time, UK has 1,007 or more than 1,000 companies working with SBTI, which, as you can see, is sharply higher than USA's number. Japan is also very close to USA with 710 companies. Then we drilled down further. We checked how many of these companies have near-term targets aligned to 1.5 degrees. 324 of the 760 American companies have near-term targets aligned to 1.5 degree. On this metric, both UK and Japan are ahead of the US. UK has 586 and Japan has 536 companies aligned to 1.5 degree. So, I mean, they're not just ahead, but they're far ahead. So data from SBTI is one way of looking at net zero progress. We checked other data sources, which also show a lag in the US corporate sector. So for example, a report by Net Zero Stocktake 2023, this is by an organization called the Net Zero Tracker. And this report reviewed net zero status of large companies across the globe, from various countries across the globe. It reported that 49% of US companies had a net zero target, and the similar figure for EU is 79%. So there's a stark difference even here.
That's an interesting finding, Ajay. Why do you think American companies are behind on their climate targets, especially considering USA's status as the largest economy in the world?
Our understanding is that this has to do with the lack of positive disclosure and compliance regime still prevailing in the US. The SEC's framework for corporate disclosure is still evolving. In March 22, the SEC had proposed a rule change that would require companies to include certain climate-related disclosures in their periodic filings. At that time, the target deadline for notifying the final rules was October 22. Now, more than a year has gone, but the final rules has still not come. The timelines for final rules have been getting pushed back due to debates over aspects of the proposal, plus certain adverse legal rulings. The anti-climate change lobby has always been strong in the US. And since the Ukraine-Russia war, the opposition to ESG as a whole has increased. So that perhaps is another reason why there's been a delay in notifying the final rules. And in general, the laggard stance or status of the US corporate sector.
That is about the corporate sector. How does the US as a country stack up on climate action?
Yeah, so if you look at the country as a whole, we do find some positives. US emissions peaked in 2007 at 6.13 gigatons, and since then have come down gradually to about 4.7 gigatons, so about 20% drop. US is no longer the biggest emitting nation. China overtook US in as far back as in 2006, as global manufacturing was anyway moving to China. However, the rate of reduction in the US needs to pick up if US has to think about achieving Paris goals. So if we calculate the CAGR of emission reductions in the US from 2007, it comes to about 1.3% per annum. But to achieve the Paris goals, which require the country to reach net zero by 2050, the annual decarbonization rate needs to increase to about 3.5%. So about 3 times the current rate. And to be fair, I mean, every country in the world is in the same boat in the sense that just about every country is lacking what is required. But yes, US has the challenge and same challenge, and as the largest economy in the world, US should ideally be setting the agenda and the pace on this goal. At the same time, one must mention that the Biden administration is taking positive steps. For example, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 provides for investments that promote this transition to low carbon economy. For example, things like providing for building EV charging infrastructure. There are provisions about switching to electrical vehicles and a whole lot of other things. But yes, perhaps a lot more needs to be done.
Thank you for shedding light on the challenges and the opportunities in the corporate sector as well as USA as a whole. Shifting gears, Ajay, what are the observations regarding the responsible investing in the asset management space in the US?
So US is, of course, the global leader in terms of number of adherents to responsible investing. If we take signatories to UNPRI as a proxy, so as of July 23, US had 976 asset owners and investment managers that had pledged to adhere to responsible investing principles as mandated by UNPRI. And this is more than any other country in the world. For example, on this metric, the next best is UK at 656 firms. But at the same time, if we were to break down the data a little further, we can see that there is a considerable scope for increase in penetration of responsible investing in the US. So, for example, in the asset owner space, 68 asset owners are signatories to UNPRI from the US. And here, the comparable number in the UK is 84. Even Germany, Canada, the number of asset owners is similar. So this is less as far as US goes. And if you look at the population of asset owners in the US, our estimate is that this is just about 1 or 2%. So the penetration of amongst asset owners is as low as 1 or 2%. In the investment management space, while there are 900 plus investment managers who have confirmed commitment to RI investing or responsible investing, here again we try to estimate the penetration, and we think it's about 10 to 12%. So on both sides, there is considerable scope for growth.
Interesting. So we see there is considerable scope for RI growth in the financial sector as well. The paper looks at practices of large investment firms as well. What are the interesting insights?
Yeah, Supriya. So we looked at what some of the large investment management firms like your Fidelity, Vanguard, Capital Growth, State Street, or Newberger are doing with respect to their ESG practices. So we found that most of these large firms have internal ESG research teams, and these dedicated ESG teams are as big as 5 to 10% of their overall investment teams. So they tend to have 30, 40, 50 people teams just dedicated to ESG. Most of these large investment managers have built proprietary ESG frameworks. So, for example, T. Rowe Price has a model called Responsible Investing Indicator Model, or RIIM. State Street has developed something it calls R Factor, and that's its proprietary ESG scoring system. Newberger Berman employs has its own rating system. It calls it NB ESG Quotient. So most of these large firms have also built tech platforms on which they house their ESG information, and they club internal data with information from external providers. So, for example, Alliance Bernstein says it houses ESG data and research on a platform it calls eSight. So it's clear that systematic effort has been put in by leading investment firms. And this is where Decimal Point can add value. We are also building proprietary frameworks like our news-based key issue assessment product. We think investors will find it a very useful addition to their internal ESG tools.
That was a fantastic discussion filled with valuable insights. Thanks, Ajay, for sharing your expertise on the USA's ESG landscape. Your perspectives have provided our listeners with a deep understanding of the importance of the scope of responsible investments in the US. To our listeners, thank you for joining us today. For more in depth insights and discussions, stay tuned to Decimal Point Analytics podcast. Until next time, this is Supriya signing off. Thank you.